All right, I'm gonna cut off about a 2-inch block of clay to make 2 mugs. Cut that in half. Oops, it's a little bit uneven, but I don't weigh my clay. A lot of potters weigh the clay and use a couple of pounds of clay per mug or however big they want to do it. I do not weigh my mugs, but I just guess, I kind of eyeball it, I'm used to doing it. And then the first thing you want to do in the process is wedge your clay, which is basically compressing the clay so that all air pockets come out of it. The process of doing that is where you put both hands on the side of your clay, and you're going to use this part of your hand to press down like this, and then pull up, both hands on the side, and press down. And it's just continually doing that over and over again to compress and wedge the clay together. It's much like wedging or kneading bread dough, if you've ever done that. And then after I've wedged it for a few minutes, since this is fresh clay, I don't need to go for several minutes. I could just do it a few times. So then I'm going to roll it into a ball, and I want to have my both ends compressed down too. So I'm going to make it as round as possible so that when I get on the wheel, it's easier to center. I think what I'll do with this ball I have here is I think I'll go ahead and make my handles out of this. I'm going to take my wire tool, and I want to cut out 3 even strips of clay. So actually I'll do 4. That way if one doesn't work out, I have an extra. There's 1, 2. Okay. Then what you have here are these. Now to make a handle, you want to make a coil. And what I do is, after I've done this, I want all the little corners out. So I'm just going to kind of make a little fat coil here with all of these. And what I do with my coil is I give it a little twist, like this. This helps it kind of keep its shape a little bit more. And then I roll it, and I use my whole hand from the fingertip to the palm, and I'm going to roll it back and forth and spread my fingers out as I go. Now, the shape I'm looking for with a handle is more of a carrot shape, where it's a little bit more narrow on one end than on the other. Okay? Like that. I don't know if you can see. So it's a little slightly tapers here. Okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this down so it flattens one side of the coil. Like that. So there it is, flattened on this side. Okay. And then I'll take my sponge with water, get my sponge real wet, and then I'm going to squeeze with this finger. I'm going to squeeze the edges of my thumb so the edges of this are smooth, but I want to make an indentation here because on a handle you want a little place there for easy grip. So I'm going to do a little depressing here, like that. Kind of take off the edges there, like that. And then I'll lay it flat to dry. Some people will hang it over their handles over something like this to dry. I don't do that. I don't find it necessary. So I'll do that with all 4 of these. Okay, we're going to start with taking a bat, hooking it onto the wheel, and squeeze some water out of my sponge and get my bat surface damp so that when I slap my clay on there, it will stick. Now, this is my wedged clay, ball of clay. The closer this is to a circle. And, the easier it's going to be to center, which is the most difficult part of throwing anything, is centering the clay, in my opinion. Now, I want to smack this down as close to the center of my wheel as possible. And that's another reason that getting it wet, you can see exactly where the center is. Okay? So I'm going to smack that down. And it's not exactly in the center. Now, centering takes some effort. So basically what I want to do is I want to keep my chin above my clay. So that's my knees kind of hug the wheel. I brace this elbow against one leg, and the clay is wet, and I'm going to compress the clay inward, and the centrifugal force, this going around and around and around, and the pressure of my hands will get this clay centered. Now, clay has nowhere to go if I'm compressing it like that, but up. So it's going to rise in my hands. I'll try and do it one-handed here. It'll rise like this. And then I'm going to squish it down, or move it down, with the edge of this palm holding my left hand as steady as possible. And I have a little wobble in my bat, and that's okay. I'm not a type of potter that has to have everything perfect, but so I can throw with it a little tad lay off center. All right, so that's basically centered right there. Now I want it basically to kind of be flat on the top, so I initially want a cone shape when I'm centering, but then when I'm getting ready to throw my pot, I want to have this flat surface, okay? Now my wheel's going pretty fast when I'm centering, so I ease off the speed once I'm ready to throw. So I'm going to get it at a pretty moderate speed here, and then I'm going to take my foot off the wheel, off the pedal, so that the speed stays the same. I want it to be real wet, and then I'm going to give it a slight indentation with my thumb. Some potters open their pots using their fingers and then pulling out. I have another little contraption that I saw. I wish I could take credit for it, but I saw there's another potter in Georgia that I met that uses this, and I went out and made one of my own. And this is just made out of PVC pipe. The handles here are a little bit longer than the center. It opens the pot for me, and this way I know that the bottom of my pot is the same on all of them. So it gives me at about a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this down. Actually, I'm going to speed up my wheel a little bit for this process. Press this down until the sides hit the wheel. So you can hear that. And then get it wet on the inside and slowly pull back until it opens as much as I need it to. And there you have a clean wall, which is what you want, a 90-degree angle between the inside of the wall and the bottom of your pot. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the wall. This is where I want my wheel at a medium speed, so not too fast, not too slow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger at the base of the pot on the inside, my sponge, some people use their finger, but I like to use a sponge, and then I'm going to carry the wall up at a very even, slow, even pace. So basically what I'm doing is I'm forcing the clay to grow taller. I'm pushing out here, but underneath it I'm pushing in. And as I'm doing that, I'm moving my fingers like this up the wall of the clay so the clay has nowhere to go but up. And I want to keep it as much in a cylinder as I possibly can. We're not shaping it into a bowl. We're not shaping it at all. And I want to get as much clay down here as I possibly can. So I call that little thing that sticks out there, I call it a little pooch. And when I get to the top, I relax my fingers because I don't want a real thin wall here yet. That will come as you stretch your clay and shape it. That top edge will thin out. Okay, and I want my walls to be very even. So right now, so once I get about right here, you can't see it, but I'm relaxing my fingertips. In other words, they're not compressing. They're just resting on the clay. Okay? So now clay shrinks, or at least this clay does. This has got porcelain in it. And it shrinks, I don't know, 10 to 15% or so in the kiln when you just fire it twice. I high fire my pieces. So it will shrink. So I know that even though this might look like a good size mug now, this is not the size I want. So I still have a little bit of clay down here underneath. I'm going to carry that wall up, 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 and make this mug a little bit bigger than I want. Now if that flares out, and I don't want it to, at this point, get both hands real wet, and you can collar it back in or choke it in. You can just put both hands on there, and then, because you want as even a cylinder, or this is how I do it. Everybody else is a little bit different. Now I'm going to check the thickness of my walls, because I don't want it to be real heavy down here or real fat, and then a real skinny wall up here. And I don't want my mug to weigh too much either. I don't want it to be super heavy. So my walls are very even. So that's good. I'm going to put my sponge in here and collect all the water that's out of the bottom of the pot, because that will just sit there and degrade the clay. All right, so I'm good with that. I could throw up a little bit more. Now I'm going to shape it. Now I can leave it this shape, that's fine. But I'm going to use a wooden rib, and you could use a trim tool, a wooden trim tool if you want. Matter of fact, sometimes I'll use a trim tool to trim the excess bottom here. Okay, off the bottom of it. I'll show you how to do that real quick, actually. So I'm going to hold this real steady in my hand. 2 hands, real steady, and slowly, not digging into the pot, but trimming down all the excess clay, going to the bat, using my needle tool to release this excess clay from the bat, stop my wheel, and then pull that excess trim off. Okay? Put that in my slop bucket here, which I recycle all my clay, so everything that goes in my slop bucket goes into my recycle bucket. And then I'm going to use my wooden rib tool here to shape. Now, some people will use this side. I use the flat edge in my hands, is the way that I do it. And this gives a real nice clean surface on the edge of your pot, so that when you go to glaze it, you don't have any problems. And then I poke out a little lip here. Some people use a little cloth or a piece of sheet or a piece of, fabric to smooth out their lip of their piece. I don't normally do that. Okay. And let me make sure I don't have any water left on the inside of it. And that's all there is to throw in the pot. Now, I take the bat off the wheel, let it dry for maybe a couple of hours until it gets slightly leather hard. Take my wire tool and trim it, and then attach my handle. It'll dry a little bit better like this off the bat. So I'm going to gently get the wheel wet, no bat, because as you can see, the concentric rings will help me to center this. Now what we're going to do is trim and make a foot on the mug or pot. And so I get that centered. I just eyeball it. Some people are really picky about it. I am not. And then I take some extra clay, make myself three little, I don't know, coils, small coils, whatever. And then that's why I get the wheel a little bit wet, so that the coil will stick to it. And I gently just push around the outside. I don't want to push too hard because I don't want to change the shape of the mug. I just want to make sure that the mug stays adhered to the wheel bat while I trim. Okay? And then I take a trim tool, which is this kind of trim tool. You also have this kind of trim tool. I tend to be able to get everything done with this bigger one, so that's the one I use. So right now I just want to smooth down my edges from where my fingerprints have been on it a little bit. Press in with my trim tool. I'm going to make a little foot. Carve in just a little bit. I don't like I've already cleaned my wheel, so I don't like my little pieces to fly everywhere, so I tend to stop my wheel, clean up as I go. So trim that up a little bit like that. And then I'm gonna smooth out the bottom piece here so that this is relatively smooth, and I'll make my foot. So I leave about a 1/4 to 1/2 inch here. I go in about 1/8 inch or so. This helps when you're glazing too, because it gives your piece a little foot to rest on, and when you're glazing, a little place for you to stop your glaze. And your glaze so if your glaze tends to run, it can pull into that little indentation there. My mugs always have lots of imperfections in them. I kind of like that, actually, when I'm holding a mug, to see all the little kind of parts that aren't perfect, but some people like a perfect mug, so then you got to go to Starbucks and buy it. All right, so once I've got that, and I like the way the foot looks, and I'm generally happy with the shape of it, I'm going to take my sponge. I got to squeeze out all the water because I don't want that too wet. Because all I'm going to do here is just take off kind of smooth it out so the edges, and no rough edges or crummy little parts, crumblies are on it. And smooth out the side. Take my stamp.
Lori, what does your stamp say?
Lori Thomas Fine Art. Hold on. And bam. Make sure all the little fingerprints are off of it. Okay. And it's ready for a handle. Okay. So this was, I didn't say this, but it's in its leather hard stage now. And at this point I'm going to let them dry upside down with the heater on. I'm going to put my mug right here in the center of my banding wheel. And then the only reason I put it on this banding wheel particularly is so that I can try and kind of get an idea. I can use this line so that I can line up where I'm going to score my handle. That's it. Nothing fancy. Okay. I also need my sponge and my water. Okay. I'm going to take my sponge and kind of clean off the sides of my handle here. And if I feel like my handle's too wide, sometimes I'll trim it. So I do feel like this is slightly, ooh, I cut it too much. Darn, double darn, I cut too much of that off. Okay, that happens sometimes. And when that happens, do the same thing to the other side. Not too much, or just kind of. Sometimes I find my razor blade or my cutting tools have a mind of their own and just go wherever they want. But I'm the kind of artist that says it wants to do that, so let it. Alright, so I'm going to smooth out with my sponge my sides. Okay. And it's firm enough, so the handle's firm enough that it's going to basically hold a shape. Okay, I'm going to see how big I want this. So I'm going to put it, my razor blade cut it and made real sharp edges, and I don't like those. So I'm going to just use my sponge and smooth those out real quick. Now, so since my handle's going to attach like this, I'm going to cut it at this angle. Okay, probably basically kind of like quite a 45-degree angle or so. And it'll attach down here like that. Now this might be too big. I don't know. Let's look at it and see what that looks like. So if this were here and this were here, the handle sticks out way too far. Okay, so that's not good. So I need to trim that off a little bit more. And I'm going to trim off the bottom because I want my handle to be a little heavier. I'll cut off a little bit more. Again, I eyeball it. There's no real science. It's art. So now I'm going to use the scoring tool, okay? And I want to line up on this edge here, so I'm going to...
Wait. Okay.
So I'll score, basically just kind of roughing up the bottom of the clay and rough up the top part of the clay there like that. And then I use my vinegar. Oh, and I'm sorry, that's called scoring. And I did the same thing to where I'm going to attach it on my handles. I was not paying attention. And take your paintbrush here with your vinegar. And also I have a bunch of sloshy, look, see my vinegar jar? See all that sloshy stuff?
It's disgusting.
It is just got clay at the bottom of it, which makes it kind of like a slurry, like a little bit of a slurry. And I use that and tap it on there like this, like so. Take my handle, press. Can you see in there? Can you get down on the side there?
Hold it one sec.
I'm going to attach it really nicely. Can you see that? Now I got to get on that side. I got to get down here. Okay, and I don't... Now this is where if you have, you know, smaller fingers, it helps, but I do not. So I'm going to blend in real good over on this side. And then if I feel like I need to, I'll throw a little vinegar in there just
Why vinegar?
right there. Hey man, that's a really good question. And I sometimes will use vinegar with like crushed up tiny pieces of toilet paper or paper, because paper clay just kind of, it helps it adhere better. Or somebody told me that one time. I don't even know, to be honest with you. It's a good question. You can use water. If you don't have vinegar, water is generally what most people use. I just use these things. I use cornstarch too if I'm rolling out a slab, so that it doesn't stick to my slab. For my thumb rest, score, vinegar, and voila, a little thumb rest right there.